Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look back at February 24th of year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're going to be examining an AP News article about a meeting between then-President Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron.
Okay.
And the Russia-Ukraine war was already underway at that point, and their conversation is surprisingly relevant even today.
Yeah, it's fascinating how this meeting kind of acts like a time capsule.
It really does.
Captured in this article, we can almost feel the tension, and the weight of the decisions they were making.
Right, and it almost feels surreal considering what we know now. This meeting took place just as the war was becoming a global crisis.
Right.
And the article really highlights the different approaches these two leaders had to dealing with Putin.
Absolutely. And the article really zeroes in on this one quote from Trump where he talks about the tremendous distrust between Russia and Ukraine.
Right.
But what's striking is how he suggests that this distrust might actually be helpful for him.
Really?
Almost like an opportunity. I'm really struggling to understand that logic.
Yeah.
How could distrust possibly be a good thing in this scenario?
Well, it seems that Trump believed that this very distrust created a vacuum.
Okay.
A space for him to step in as a deal maker.
Okay.
Almost as if the lack of trust between the warring parties somehow made his involvement more crucial.
Okay. So he saw himself as the solution to a problem he was also in a way describing.
Right.
That's fascinating. But was everyone on board with that? Didn't the article also talk about Macron's perspective?
Yes, and that's where we see a sharp contrast.
Right.
Macron, while also hoping for a peaceful resolution, was far more cautious.
Okay.
The article emphasizes his call for verified security guarantees for Ukraine,
Right.
which hints at a certain skepticism toward Trump's more optimistic outlook.
So while Trump seemed to believe in the power of personality and deal-making, Macron was taking a more pragmatic, even skeptical approach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's almost as if Macron was saying, sure, let's talk about peace, but let's also make sure any agreement has teeth. Real mechanisms to ensure it's not just empty promises.
It makes you wonder if this difference in approach reflects their personalities, their leadership styles, or maybe even deeper national interests at play.
Likely a combination of all three.
Yeah.
Remember, this is Trump we're talking about.
Of course.
His history with Russia and Ukraine is complicated, to say the least.
You're not kidding. Remember the controversy over the 2016 election and the allegations of Russian interference?
Well, yeah.
That backdrop undoubtedly colored Trump's view of Putin's intentions.
Absolutely. And on the other hand, Macron, representing a key European power directly impacted by the conflict, might have felt a greater sense of urgency for a stable resolution that truly protected Ukraine.
It's like we're piecing together a puzzle here, using this meeting as a window into the minds of these leaders.
Yeah.
What clues can we find about their true intentions and the forces shaping this conflict? We've got Trump, the deal maker, believing he can leverage distrust to his advantage.
And then you have Macron, the pragmatist, urging caution and emphasizing the need for verifiable safeguards.
That's a fascinating dynamic.
Would you say?
Absolutely. And it sets the stage for some really important questions about the broader implications of this meeting, which I think we should dive into next. Okay, so we've got these two powerful leaders with drastically different approaches to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But how does this meeting, this clash of perspectives, actually help us understand the state of the war at this point in time?
Well, it's a snapshot, a frozen moment that reveals a lot about the fragile hopes for peace and the immense challenges facing those who sought it.
Right.
Trump, with his characteristic optimism, seems to have genuinely believed a deal was within reach.
And the article even mentions that he felt Putin was ready to negotiate.
Right. But remember, Macron's insistence on verified security guarantees.
Right.
It suggests that not everyone shared Trump's rosy outlook. There was a deep undercurrent of doubt, a recognition that any agreement with Putin would need to be airtight foolproof.
Which makes you wonder, did they even agree on what those guarantees would look like? What concrete steps would satisfy Macron's need for verification?
That's the million-dollar question. The article doesn't go into specifics, but we can speculate.
Okay.
Perhaps Macron was pushing for international monitoring of the Russia-Ukraine border or the deployment of peacekeeping forces.
Okay.
Maybe he envisioned a system where sanctions on Russia would be lifted gradually, contingent on demonstrable progress towards peace.
It sounds like he was trying to build in safeguards mechanisms to prevent backsliding or return to violence.
Exactly, and that cautious approach, that emphasis on verification, speaks volumes about the level of distrust that permeated the situation.
It's like they were trying to build a house of peace on a foundation of quicksand.
A very apt analogy. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of this meeting, its place in the broader geopolitical landscape of year.
Okay.
We can't view this meeting in isolation.
Right.
It was taking place against a backdrop of rising global tensions, a world increasingly fractured along ideological and economic lines.
So this wasn't just about Russia and Ukraine. It was also about the shifting dynamics between the United States and Europe, between different visions of how to maintain global order.
Precisely, Trump, with his America First agenda, had already strained relationships with traditional European allies.
Right.
And his seemingly warm relationship with Putin further fueled anxieties about America's role in the world.
It's almost as if this meeting became a microcosm of the larger geopolitical struggles playing out on the world stage.
Yeah.
You had Trump representing a more unilateral, transactional approach to foreign policy,
Yeah.
and Macron trying to hold on to a more collaborative, rules-based system.
And caught in the middle of this clash of titans was Ukraine, its fate hanging in the balance.
It's a stark reminder that even in moments of crisis, personal relationships and individual worldviews can have a profound impact on the course of history. We can analyze the strategic interests and power dynamics all we want, but sometimes it comes down to who's in the room and how they see the world.
And that's why the article's focus on tremendous distrust is
Yeah.
so critical. It wasn't just an obstacle to overcome, it was a defining characteristic of the entire situation. A force that shaped everything from the tone of the meeting to the potential outcomes.
So let's talk about those potential outcomes. What were the possible consequences of this tremendous distrust, not just in the short term, but maybe looking even further ahead?
Well, one obvious consequence was the difficulty in reaching a lasting peace agreement. If the key players couldn't even agree on the basic parameters of trust and verification, how could they possibly bridge the deeper divides fueling the conflict?
It's like trying to build a bridge over a chasm without any anchors or supports.
Exactly. And even if some kind of ceasefire or agreement had been reached, the underlying distrust would have continued to fester, making the peace fragile and susceptible to collapse.
Right.
Imagine a world where every minor incident, every perceived provocation could reignite the conflict because of the lack of basic trust.
And wouldn't that distrust also make it harder to address the root causes of the conflict, the historical grievances and political tensions that fueled the violence in the first place?
Absolutely, distrust poisons the well, making it impossible to have the kind of honest and open dialogue necessary for true reconciliation.
So the tremendous distrust wasn't just a symptom of the conflict, it was also a major obstacle to resolving it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And in many ways, that distrust has proven to be remarkably persistent. Even today, years later, it continues to shape the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, casting a long shadow over any attempts to build a lasting peace.
Yeah, it's almost like we're looking at a crossroads in history, a moment where different paths could have been taken.
I see what you mean. We've talked about Trump's optimism, Macron's cautious pragmatism, and the pervasive distrust shadowing everything. It really does feel like the fate of the region was hanging in the balance.
And it makes you wonder what would have happened if they had found a way to bridge those differences, to overcome that distrust. And
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
build a more stable foundation for peace.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
But even without knowing the alternative outcomes, I think this deep dive has given us some incredibly valuable insights.
Absolutely.
For one thing, it reminds us that history isn't inevitable. It's shaped by the choices of individuals,
Right.
by their personalities, their biases, and their relationships with each other.
We tend to think of international relations as this grand game of chess, with nations moving strategically across the board. But this meeting captured in this article really reveals the human element, the messy reality of diplomacy, where personalities and perceptions can matter just as much as military might or economic power.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of understanding those personalities, those underlying motivations if we want to make sense of the world around us.
It also makes you appreciate the challenges faced by diplomats like Macron, who are trying to navigate these complex situations, balancing national interests with a desire for peace and stability.
It's a delicate dance. And this meeting gives us a glimpse behind the curtain, showing us the tightrope walk that diplomacy often entails.
So to wrap things up, I want to circle back to the heart of this deep dive.
Okay.
That tremendous distrust between Russia and Ukraine. It was present in every aspect of that meeting, shaping the perspectives of both leaders and ultimately limiting the possibilities for a lasting peace.
And sadly, as we know, the distrust didn't disappear overnight. It continues to shape the relationship between Russia and Ukraine even today.
Which leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with. We've explored how distrust can poison relationships between nations. But I think it's also important to reflect on how distrust can impact our own lives, our interactions with others, even our ability to understand and empathize with different perspectives.
That's a powerful point. Distrust can create a vicious cycle, making it harder to communicate, to find common ground, to build the bridges that are so essential for a healthy society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as we continue to navigate this complex and ever-changing world, I think it's worth asking ourselves how we can become more aware of our own biases, more willing to listen to opposing viewpoints, and more committed to building trust, both in our personal lives and in the global community.
That's a challenge worth embracing, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's a challenge that demands our attention, our critical thinking, and perhaps most importantly, our empathy.
Until next time.
Keep diving.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.